And let's just take a look at our little slideshow framework here. All right, so first Canada FRC Mentor Sessions 2022, team management. Welcome everyone. And you'll see here our sessions, of course, are organized by First Canada with strong support from Studica, one of our suppliers here in Ontario. Studica has supplied us with all kinds of things from First Lego League to First Tech Challenge to FRC related materials located in Mississauga. They're going to be the site of the second half of our mentor sessions for the summer. August 4th and 5th, we'll see us gathering there at Studica for 5 different sessions about manufacturing, electronics, and robot operation that will kind of summarize our coding sessions and bring everything together. And hopefully you'll be able to join us there at that time. And of course, the schedule for that has been shared with you on the community updates. So what is the overall plan for this afternoon? Here's our schedule. We did a little bit of introductions and getting to know each other. And then breaking up our session into 4 little bits. The first part's here, the human foundations of team management. Though we are building robots, we are not robots, we are humans. And what are some of the principles on which we may base a sound strategy of team management? We can discuss that. And then 150 is the practical considerations of team management. This brings me back to my days of trying to handle the fire hose that is First Canada Communications. And now, since I am now sending out those communications, I've seen it from both sides, and I'm very, very hesitant to put too much of it together. It's really difficult to get the right balance. We'll take a little break for 15 minutes at 2:30, and followed by discussion of project management techniques, and then wrap it all up with some hands-on project management experience in an online setting, and see where that will bring us by the end of the afternoon. And yeah, we fully hope for a nice and lively conversation around all of these things. So having had our introductions, we may move on to the human foundations of team management. We can look at some of the basic human principles, and some of these are tied together in the first framework of core values. And then we can look at some basic project management principles to get us a big picture of how to manage teams, for example. And then we can also look at schemes of human organization. And this will be really great to hear from the teams. How do you organize your sub-teams, for example? And see where that all goes through our discussions. All right. So in our first part, just having a little discussion about the basic human principles and what are some of the assumptions that we operate on about what is a human being and how does that relate to our decisions as teachers and as community members and mentors with respect to our FRC robotics teams. So I think this is a good place to continually go back and forth between sharing and not sharing. We can maybe just talk about this for a little bit. What are some of the basic assumptions that we make when we're trying to interact with our students, our participants in our robotics teams, and how does that affect how the teams go? And maybe I'll just set off with an example. And of course, when I say this, this is what worked for me. Maybe this is not what worked for others. I'll ask a question. If a student is in your class as a teacher, for example, and that student asks to go to the washroom, what is your response?
Go.
Go. So that's a good way. Just go. Now, it may depend on the nature of your class, because some classes you may have a different answer than others. I can see for some classes, no, you got to stay in here right now and we'll walk you down the hall, because there could be an issue with a student going alone to the washroom and not coming back for an hour. In my classroom, I basically would answer this: well, you don't really have to ask me. You're a human being. The washroom's down the hall. Go and use the washroom. And if you don't come back to my class, that's not really your problem, even though that's not obeying the rules. That's meaning that my class is not exciting enough or compelling enough for you to join the class. So I had better do something about that. So that was my kind of view. And what I'm getting at with this question is here, what do we assume is a human being, and how does that affect what we do? And schools have this history rooted in preparation of obedient factory workers from the 1800s. And some of those practices persist even to this day. This array of rows and desks in the rows, and the students having to sit down and not move until that bell rings. And then they're learning math from 9 till 10. And at exactly 10, we move down the hall, or the teacher moves down the hall. And then we do our English from 10 to 11. And just as we're getting into the flow of writing our paragraph at 11 o'clock, the bell rings and you have to go down the hall and do something else. So it's highly structured, and it's trying to form the behavior of the students. And so this practice of, can I go to the washroom? No, may I go to the washroom? Okay, yes, you may go to the washroom. That sort of arises out of this command and control approach. Whereas I think organizational and human science has moved along a little since then, and there are some more subtleties that we may bring to our organization of classes. And if we see students not as inherently disobedient, rebellious little troublemakers, but highly talented and highly capable and curious members of a growing community of learning, that affects our team management quite a lot, and our classroom management for that matter. So I wonder if anyone has any thoughts about that, how we think about our students, and how does that affect the way we set rules, the way we reinforce rules, the way we set expectations for behavior, and so on in our teams?
Well, I'd like to say that I start with the assumption that they are cognizant, smart kids, and they need guidance to learn new skills. If they prove otherwise, of course, then I'll take appropriate measures. But I start with the assumption that they're doing it, they're there for a reason, and it's not because they were forced into it. Especially with our community team, we're getting kids from all different schools. I have no experience from school, environments anymore. I'm 67 and, left that a long time ago.
So yeah, that is a concern for some. As we're in the community team, you sometimes may have the advantage that most of your students actually want to be there in each session. Whereas if you're in a class and you're actually trying to do FRC in a class, I had this a lot at my school, even though the FRC team was very popular, sometimes I would get 25 people in my computer engineering technology class, only 12 of them were on the FRC team. My hope was that all of them would be, but that was just not the reality. And so how to deal with those who didn't actually necessarily want to be there, but those were the ones who just wanted to fill in a class and let their schedule be full. So I think that has a lot to do that the project management and student management is a really key sort of thing to consider. In my early years of teaching, my first year, I used to send this one student out on the balcony of the school when he disrupted in the class. And when I went outside and noticed how cool the balcony was compared to the 35°C classroom, I realized why he was being disruptive, and I changed my approach. And so I was just doing what my teachers did. When disruption, you're out of there. But then that's not where we're there. Can we appeal to this sort of more subtle and noble nature of our constituents and create kind of a better environment for everyone? So that's something that we could talk about a lot, but I think it's something important in terms of your project management. How you consider the participants really affects how you organize your activities and what outcomes you're going to get. And I think some of these things I gave a lot of thought to, because when I started FRC, I had no idea of just how much was involved. And so I was the only teacher involved. And by the time I did a semester of it, all the other teachers were highly afraid of getting anywhere near FRC because they saw how much work it was. So it took me a few years to convince other people to start helping me as a mentor. And it was a long, hard road. And we was just getting there until March 13th, 2020, when everyone can guess what happened. We had the 5 mentors at that point. So that's a little bit about assumptions regarding human nature. We can also look at education versus training. I think that's a really important sort of lens through which to look at the preparation of mentors and students for robotics. And then this idea of student as teacher. So let's just take a look here. Actually, I just realized there's a little bit more we can just share here. With respect to education versus training, we call it an education system. And my argument is that actually a lot of what we do is training. And that just depends on your definition of what education is. And I like to keep this in mind because it really changes the way that we can organize our activities and our projects. So for example, what I call training is an outside force changing the thoughts and habits and behaviors of a student. So the teacher says, no, don't do that, and gives you a little slap across the wrist. Well, until 1971, that was actually legal in Ontario, I guess. So you provide a punishment or some kind of stimulus, and you change that student's mind. Also, here's an issue A. It's in the news these days, and it's a little bit contentious. And the student says, well, I think these 3 things about issue A. And the teacher says, well, that's all well and good, but obviously the answer is this. And then the teacher provides the answer and provides an expected opinion. And if you look carefully at the news over the last 20 or 30 years, we've been actually moving towards a news cycle that decides for us what to think, more so than what was before. It was a little bit more allowing you to discover what was to be thought about things. And then finally, education, instead of training, it might be considered bringing forth those talents and capacities that already exist inside a student, if they just haven't been shown yet. Something like going mining. You're mining for a gem or some kind of precious metal, and it's there. You just have to find a way to help it manifest. And when we think of education like this, we provide a structure, yes, and we provide some expected behaviors, and yet we are seeing these talents sort of bloom forth from within a student. If we think of training in a math class, then at the end, we want all of these students to be within a very narrow band of capability in calculus, for example. But if we think about it in terms of education, we may recognize in 5 of our students, very artistic students who are not mathematically oriented, and they approach the mathematics with a very artistic way. 5 others are going to be advanced mathematicians one day, and they go way ahead in the curriculum. And a few others may just want to get through the course. So with an educational lens, using the word in that way, we're allowing those who are highly talented to express their talents while finding ways to meet the needs of others. And so I think those are principles that apply well in project management as well. Another part of project management that came to mind when setting up this sort of session, this idea of empowerment, the student as a teacher. And the reason I bring this up, say I'm doing a computer engineering technology class, and I've got my FRC robot there. And I'm talking about class a lot, but this also applies when we're doing a community team and we're meeting on some Saturday afternoon, for example. Now, there are 2 ways I could approach it. Let's say that the teacher is the source of all knowledge, which before the age of the internet was absolutely the case in many situations. So the teacher's there, and step 1, let's learn about the Roborio. I say Roborio still. Or let's learn about sensors. Okay, so the teacher teaches about sensors for 1 hour. Well, first of all, maybe 3 of the students already know about sensors, and not everyone is going to be putting those sensors on the robot. It turns out that the robot has many facets to it. But the teacher does not have time to teach about the sensors and the actuators and the voltage and the ways to connect everything together. There's just too many topics in an FRC robotics project. So this is where in my classroom, I fairly quickly made a strong move towards the student as the teacher. I stopped lecturing and I made it much more student driven like this. We said, okay, here's our FRC robot. We need to put the electronics together. Who is going to flash the radio? Who's going to prepare the roborio? Who's going to get some sample code and so on? And who's going to connect everything together? We allocate small teams of students these tasks and let them research how to do it. When it comes down to it, then the students are showing each other in these presentations how to do all of that. And the teacher is acting as a guide and saying, oh, here's another website where you could learn about that way to fasten those wires and so on. And suddenly we have 30 people in the classroom teaching each other instead of just one. So this idea of empowerment really help with your project management. And of course, it's limited by certain conditions in schools and otherwise, but there's a lot that can be said for having the student as a teacher, a whole community of learners, rather than one teacher teaching with a one-way sort of interaction with the students. And this final one, love, this is not like this Hollywood love, but I think this is a deep and caring concern for other human beings, actively promoted in the class. I think we see that coming through in gracious professionalism, which is part of the framework for FRC. And I think there's something to be said for cultivating such an environment in your classroom where everyone feels safe to make their contributions regardless, where even the worst ideas are most heartily welcomed, because what are two bad ideas? Either A, a worse idea, or B, the most brilliant development in the history of robotics. So this loving sort of atmosphere where everyone encourages and uplifts each other and doesn't see it as, oh, I'm getting into Harvard, too bad for you, I'm going to step on your shoulders on the way. But no, we're going to work together to create the most amazing projects. And we're cultivating this atmosphere where everyone is able to do that. So I thought we'd start with some of these basic human principles, as they actually form part and parcel of some of these emerging project management frameworks that we'll talk about later in the afternoon. And a good place to pause and hear some of your thoughts about all of the above. So, what place do human qualities have within a project management framework or within the management in general of a FRC robotics team, whether in the classroom or in the community?
I just wanted to share a delightful story of one of my students this year. So coming into FRC, I don't have a lot of the tool skills. So I had never used a bandsaw before. So one of our grade 9 students took on, because he was there when I was supervising a lot of the time, to help teach me the tools. And I thought it was absolutely amazing. And he took the time and made sure I did things safely and called me out on my safety glasses if I didn't have them on. And I think that epitomizes what we're doing with these programs, but it's also recognizing that even though age is not necessarily a factor, it's experience and competence, which is something we can't do as much in the classroom because they're grouped by grade or age more than skill level.
Oh, wow, that's a wonderful sort of kind of observation, and something that we find in the world of industry. People are not grouped by age or experience level. We have interdisciplinary groups that are accomplishing these tasks, and FRC can start to point us in that direction, even in the world of education. And there may be a point at which we transcend this age segregation, because it is a form of segregation. But what's the best way to learn? Well, from a respected elder. And in a typical classroom, there's only one elder, that's the teacher. But in a highly varied classroom, there are numerous elders, even some of whom are 1 or 2 years older than the other learners. I found this in a K-12 school. My grade 11 and 12s used to go down and read with the kindergarten and grade 1 kids, and that was the most fabulous experience ever. And you can imagine a grade 11 starting to achieve this level of self-consciousness, thinking twice before doing that crazy stunt after school, jumping off this or that, or doing something of a spectacle, because those grade 1 students are right there and witnessing everything. It created a great atmosphere that way. maybe there's some more reflections. Thank you, Kirsten. That was a great example.
I'll just chime in here that when the students come in September, most schools, I imagine, have a club sign-up day. So there's one usually scheduled for later September. So the students run that sign-up day usually. Again, I'm not inside the school, so I'm not there to see what they do, but they market it to the school body and they get sign-ups. When we have our first in-person team meeting, we ask them if any of them have leadership aspirations. Now, I'm fortunate that the school has become an international baccalaureate school. So for a number of students, for their extracurricular requirements for that program, leadership skills and is sort of built into that. So a lot of them do have aspirations that they want to become leaders. So we take those students, we go through our team structure, we say, where do you think you'd like to become a leader of this team? Maybe not necessarily this year, depends what grade level you're in. If they're coming back from a subsequent year, they may take it on. And then we sort of filter out who we think is the best persons for that role. And then they actually start doing the teaching. I simply send them resources. Again, I'm external to the school, so I just send them resources. And especially during these past COVID years, they've been online teaching themselves CAD, for example, and programming online when they were out of school, and then they were meeting in school at lunch to do that as well. So I'm fortunate in that sense that we've had a number of students that stepped up to become leaders. And luckily for a lot of them, they do have the correct personal skills to become leaders. We find some of the kids don't want to be leaders after all, when they see how much work it is. And then of course, there's always that one or two kids that don't want to become leaders, but they do have the skill set. They're just a little bit more timid or shy. And so we try to put them as a secondary captain of, let's say, the design team or the CAD team, the programming team. And so they're sort of mentoring, hopefully by an older student. So that works for us.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. That's a really important consideration, how leadership relates to everything we're doing. And I think that's something we'll speak about just very shortly. Just continuing through this flow of ideas here. We've talked a little bit about some of the basic human principles. Just to go along with this, some basic project management principles. And this is speaking specifically about project management techniques, which are in the final part of our afternoon. But this also really does well in terms of our thoughts for organizing an FRC team. A traditional company, just a generic company, say 50 years ago, and that company is now trying to do a project. Let's make a widget, a machine of some sort. So it starts with this meeting in the boardroom, and the CEO and all the managers and vice presidents, they get together and say, well, we need to make a widget machine. Great, because that's what everyone's buying these days. So we're going to make this widget machine. Okay. So let's get some people researching about what the widget machines are in detail. Great. They researched it, and they take a few months to do that. And then they will get some people to do the detailed designs of the widget machine. So we'll get our CAD people in there, our drafting people, whatever it is at that time. And then we go to the manufacturing facility and we start producing these widgets, and each of these steps is taking a few months. And then finally one day, maybe 10 or 15 months down the road, a widget rolls off the assembly line, and they go to sell this widget, and then they read the newspaper article, widgets are out and thingy-madoodles are in. Oh no, wait a moment, we just produced 1 million widgets and now no one's buying them. And that's a traditional waterfall approach to management. By the time you get done what you set out to do, the world has changed and moved on, and you're left there in the situation that was in existence 10 or 15 months ago. And so this idea emerged in computer programming sort of organizations because they don't have to deal with the physical build out of things as much as they just have to get the code together. And they realize that rapid iteration is a really good way to go. And you start with a plan and you have a set amount of time or a set plan, and then you execute it, not on a scale of 10 or 15 months, but even on a day or a week basis. And after that day or that week, you produce some kind of product that is a work in progress, yes, but it represents a nascent version of the final product. Then you review, is that great? Yes, we got a menu here, and when we press the button, the little screen comes up for us to enter the details. Great. Then we show that product to a potential buyer or customer, and the customer will say, well, that's great. We also need a menu for changing the user profile. Great. Next week, we'll work on that. And where possible, you may have several teams working on different aspects of that same project working in parallel. So here are a few project management principles that we may consider with respect to our own teams. First of all, iterating our work and regularly reflecting on that, and then responding to changing needs as the needs arise, and then working in parallel where possible. Those are a few things that we can keep in mind with respect to our projects, and we'll see how that will figure through the afternoon. And this brings us to a comment that was just brought to us. And here are two schemes of human organization. And this is where we discuss, well, what does it mean to be a leader? In many human schemes of organization, we have the pyramid, and each level of the pyramid has fewer people, and somewhere at the top is like the CEO or the president of the United States of America or something like this, and everyone else sort of serves this leader at the top. Whereas in biological systems like the cells in your body, you have multiple connections. It's not really shown very nicely in this diagram, but you have multiple connections between multiple nodes and cells. And it's somewhat of a flattened scheme in that no one individual is higher than the others. So now with respect to our projects, that is our FRC teams, what scheme of human organization do you use? And how does that affect the outcomes of your project? A great place to stop and discuss.
(1325) definitely uses the senior students to teach the younger students. They've broken it down into sub-teams: electrical, programming, mechanical, CAD. And in that sense, it's a little bit still of a pyramid. On the other hand, the worker level, the younger students who are implementing some of these things may still jump from one team, sub-team to the other, depending on what's needed at any given time.
So that's great. It's kind of like a hybrid in a way. There are links between the bottom of the pyramid, aren't there? Yeah.
One thing, William, that when I had my own team that we found was we thought at the time we spotted, because we were teachers, so we would obviously know this, that this would be a great leader, that this would be somebody that we had to have, and they had great ideas and so on and so forth. But what we found was that that didn't work as well as we had hoped. That sometimes if those people didn't get their idea picked for what the tool was going to be, that they bailed, right? So we later came to realize that it was more of a self-sorting thing for them. And one of the things that I wanted to implement, but it didn't happen. I wasn't there for a long time before I retired from teaching. But when I went back, I found that they had implemented an agile programming methodology, and there were sticky notes everywhere about what needs to be done, what was being done, and what was completed, and so forth. The one thing about that, though, that you mentioned about the flexibility, the one caveat about all that I found, and I find in this FSM job, is that eventually you have to make a choice. This is what we're going to do. You just don't have time to keep iterating as much as you might want, especially in the situation we're finding ourselves in now, where we don't have many senior students who have done much in the past because they're all gone. And we would see teams that just kept, they've got 3 weeks left to go on their build. They're still changing what they're going to do. They're still changing. Oh, I saw this online. And there has to come a point where they have to make a decision, say, okay, maybe it's not the best product we can create, but if we keep going, we'll never get a chance to drive. We'll never get a chance to spend on coding on it the time that we need. So there's a balancing that sort of needs to take place, I think.
Oh, great. That's an interesting thing. And it's interesting you mentioned agile. It'd be interesting to hear the different experiences with that sort of approach. It'd be really great to hear how the teams organize this notion of leadership. Like, here's a situation that may arise. One thing that happened in my first year, a few of you may have heard this story, actually in my second year, right in the beginning of January, when we're just now finished the kickoff and about to start the season, it turns out that one student sort of created a situation where he became the leader of the team. And he had pictured the team kind of like, if we see this diagram here, this pyramid. So the student was here, there may be 2 or 3 subgroups, electronics, coding, and manufacturing, so on. And then team members like this. And so anything that happened, that student was calling the shots. Can we put on a different module in the robot? Well, no, because we're doing this way. The student really did take charge, and quite a top-heavy kind of charge of the team. And that's the mental model out there. This sort of word on the street is, oh yeah, that's what you do to be a leader. Yeah, you got to just assert your authority, make sure everyone knows who's boss, and make sure you get things done. And then by the end of the season, when it came down to it, we were at the final few matches of our competition, and very few team members were willing to be there. It had seemed to discourage the participation of the others because that one person had been taking charge. And that's where we actually got into project management research. A few students who were there over the summertime, we used to have summer school as well, we got into doing some research and we read a few books and came up with this other scheme. And that's when we actually adopted that other scheme that you see here, maybe not exactly represented by this picture, but a much more flattened and interconnected way of managing our team around central roles. Like maybe this group here is working on the manufacturing, this one's working on the coding, and this one's working on some kind of module of the robot, and so on. There are connections between each, but no one is particularly in charge as long as all the work is getting done. We developed that over the next few years, and every time we developed this, our team got a little bit better at getting things done. So there was a point, maybe 2 or 3 years later, when I was just walking around at the competition, which was a luxury compared to the first year. We were just running around. It was crazy. But I just pointed out my students working in the pit, and I said, okay, who's the leader there? And it's really nice to just be able to say, you could watch them for a whole hour, but you'd have no idea who is the leader because no one's barking directions on anyone else. Whereas in other years, it was quite clear who was the leader. And yet that was not a very efficient way of doing things. So in terms of our team structure and organization, though a pyramid is very nice to keep things organized in terms of who's doing what and how the different parts of the robot relate together. Even this idea that the people on the bottom of the pyramid were already crossing over suggests that maybe a different way might also help us. The pyramid tends to come with this attitude that, oh, I'm higher on the pyramid than you, so your opinion doesn't count. Actually, on a robotics team, everyone is a valued contributor, whether it's their first day or they've been there for 5 years. And if we put it that way, then even someone we don't expect to make a good contribution may come up with the crucial idea to move us forward, but only if there's an environment created where everyone feels capable of making that contribution. So I guess in terms of managing our team and project management and the overall picture, would you rather have 2 or 3 people doing the heavy work, staying up all night and working, or would you rather have the entire team engaged in this process? And over time, we gravitated towards the latter in my own team, and that made it possible for me to get a good night's sleep after about 2 years. So there's that comes back again to the human fundamental assumptions of human interactions that go into the organization of our team. Is a leader someone that must be served and must be completely obeyed? In fact, the world of science showed that that's a very dangerous kind of approach. Isaac Newton made a few statements about light that took 200 years or more to overcome, because people thought, oh, it was Newton, he was obviously right. But in fact, he wasn't quite right about certain things. And so our attitudes about leaders often affect the ability of a team to execute the tasks it needs to do. Everyone needs to feel like they need to contribute, but this idea of the leader kind of gets in the way. Yes, Tom.
So one of the situations that occurred to me this last year is, yes, we've been giving these sub-team leader, authority, but then it's like they one of them that frustrated the heck out of me closed their mind to listening and learning, because I'm now the boss. And I'm going like, okay, I'm ripping out my hair. I'm trying to show you alternate ways of doing things, just so you consider, 2 or 3 alternatives before you jump on the first solution. How do you deal with that?
Well, there it is. And if we're a pyramid and you're in charge of a whole branch of that pyramid, well, sorry to you, I'm in charge here. And that can be very dangerous. So it has to be cultivated in a way. I think there's a really good example. And at the end of my presentation document, there's a little reference to a book. The book that we ended up picking up looking at team leadership was called Reinventing Organizations. And in this, Frederic Laloux documents about 12 different organizations around the world, which in 2014 were kind of pushing the boundaries of what is possible in organizational structure. He noted a pattern of similar discovery happening in parallel, but without connection between these companies in different industries. My favorite example is in the health industry. Up until the early 2000s, the Dutch government had thought, well, let's put the computer programmers and engineering people on this problem of home medical visits. We'll get a computer to optimize the time between the visits and put a schedule for each home visit nurse. At 12:15, you have to be at Mr. Jones' house. At 12:22, you're going to go down the street to Mr. Brown's house or something. And going to Mr. Jones has some kind of bandage on the arm, and you're just bandaging it up. You're looking at your watch, and you got 2 more minutes to get this done. Mr. Jones said, oh, yes, but I'm having a trouble in my stomach. There's something wrong. Oh, sorry, I can't really get to that right now because 12:22, got to get down the street. That worked terribly. When Buurtzorg, this organization, started with 4 nurses, they took it a different way. Instead of saying who's in charge and how to optimize things, they centered their work around the human being, saying when you go to Mr. Jones' house, listen to Mr. Jones and even take time for a cup of tea. And hear what's happening. Yes, the bandage is okay, but my stomach is hurting. Okay, well, let's see what's happening with that. And treat them like a human being, not like an obstacle to fulfilling your computer-generated schedule. The result of this creation of this company, Buurtzorg, which organized itself in teams of 12 as it grew, was that 70% or more of the home visit market went to this company in favor instead of the government-run, highly computer-oriented, scheduled-oriented kind of home visit practice. And within these groups of 12, they handled all functions required for an entire company, including executive function in terms of making decisions, marketing and human resources and paying people, and then ordering supplies. All of that was authorized from within those teams of 12. And they scheduled their own selves, but they weren't time oriented. They said, well, here's everyone we have to get to this week. Get to them when you can. Have a cup of coffee, listen, make connections. The health indicators went through the floor. The satisfaction went through the roof. And that's what resulted in a massive shift from the old to the human-centered sort of thing. And I think the short part about this is that within those teams of 12, there's no superstar who's the CEO trampling on everyone else, but there's our teams of collaborative people making decisions. And I thought that's a kind of a response to Tom's comment there. Maybe that's a different way we might consider. There's still often a section, but no one person is going to dominate the others. In fact, in 1 month, one person is the CEO of that section. The next month, someone else is. That's okay. We can take on different roles over different times as needed. And another side effect is that everyone has a redundancy about every task. So if someone's away that day, someone else can take on that task. That's okay. So those are a few things to consider in terms of organizing our pyramid into a more flattened and responsive structure without that kind of attitude that, oh, I don't want to hear from you. So a few thoughts there.
See, I found that was also a sign of maturity. Now, just as a side note, I've been with First for probably 18 years now, but the first 15 was as a judge and a judge advisor. So I always was looking to organize adults, you know, the wild, the type A personalities who all wanted to be in charge, and now they had to work as teams again. But happily, it really worked. People were willing to listen and learn, and not try to dominate the conversation. I think that was a sign of their maturity, because they were looking for something similar in their teams when they got back to work. Students, on the other hand, that's where I guess I'm struggling to get them to be, receptive, as opposed to, I'm not cramming information down their throats. I'm trying to open a world where they can explore what interests them and make it, exciting, if not fun, learning some of the difficult stuff, but certainly challenging so that they grow from those experiences.
And that's quite a tall order. That's a kind of a shift of mindset in a way for many who may have come from a more sort of passive approach where some expert is just sharing everything and there's no exploration and curiosity and all of that. One way to get it, how do you get yogurt? Well, you start with some yogurt. And how do you get inquiring and interested and curious students? Well, you start with a few to model it and let the others sort of follow along. But that's not always possible when you have a rookie team each year, like I did. Different things have to happen. So yeah, no one size fits all in these cases. So that kind of is at least a consideration of some of the fundamental principles that go behind managing our teams. Brief bibliography at the end where you can find out some of these places to start looking and maybe share some of your own. Okay, so now we move on to practical considerations. And the first one here is really coming from conversations all around the province. It took me about 5 years to get a team of 5 mentors, as in my first year was too busy. But as I got more mentors, it was getting more easily achieved. In the year 2020, before we went to competition, my role had ceased to be just trying to hold the whole thing together to just walking around and seeing how everyone was and seeing what support was required. And that was a really satisfying moment to have achieved that. Structuring the FRC team, we've talked about that. Maybe we can speak about some more practical considerations that come out of this. And how does our season timeline relate to this team of mentors? And how do we get that mentorship and support between the teams? We are entering a time of relatively high retiring high percentage of the population is retiring over these next few years. The baby boom, so to speak, is now reaching that age of retirement. And with that retirement, we'll see a lot of the expertise accumulated in our system and the spare energy and time in our system coming away. And those who have to carry on with a lot more on their plates. And so what does this look like for a province full of FRC teams and having their key mentors of 10 or 20 years experience retiring? What will replace that? And how do we work with that? So I think that's when I say assembling a team of mentors, it's not only for a particular FRC team, but thinking of Ontario as a big team, how do we organize ourselves across the province to optimize that support from our mentors? As a result, how do we structure our teams, especially in light of our discussion leading up to this? And what does our season timeline look like? And what are some of the big picture items there? So maybe it'd be just great to hear from the teams about your situation with mentors. What are your strategies for getting more mentors? How are you managing in this time when a few years have gone by without additional expertise being added to the system and people retiring and students retiring to university, leaving the teams with a little less expertise as has been typical in the past?
I think for my team, I'm part of that future planning where as we mentor students, we also mentor mentors. Okay, so who is going to do these roles in 2, 3, 5 years? I think so that's why I'm here. I'm learning how this all works so I can take some of the load. And I think we need to do that as well. I don't know how we reach out and get new mentors other than we're in a small town, so everybody knows us.
Oh, that helps. I was actually really fascinated with 5024's sort of history as Gianna's here. That's a very large team traditionally, and there's been a large number of mentors. I'd be really fascinated to just understand how was that team assembled? How many are teachers and how many are community members at large? And what goes into maintaining that from year to year? Because obviously there's some momentum that was built.
Sure. Well, I haven't been here since the start, but here's what I know. We have 5 teacher mentors. Initially, I believe there were 3. And then 2 more were recruited over the years as there was a need, something along those lines. We have 1, 2, 3 mentors that are associated with our sponsors. So our sponsors not only provide financial assistance, but have provided us with some mentors. And they keep coming back because they're having so much fun because the students are so fantastic to work with. In terms of community mentors, that is really down to me and my husband at this point. If I'm not trying, I don't want to forget anyone. Our son was on the team and he wanted us to get involved, so we did. He graduated. We loved working with the team, so we stayed working with the team. But then the other thing we have happening is students who are coming back wanting to mentor. So graduated, just starting to gain some real world experience, or have already done that and coming back and saying, hey, I'd like to help. Here's what I've been doing. And then, we have one fresh graduate that's like, I want to mentor right away. and he wanted to mentor in the area that he'd been working in. So he had the experience to help. Now, 2020, everybody knows that made it a challenge, but he's still with us. So it really, for our team, really comes from the joy we get from working with our students. And, how do these students provide that joy? Are they all perfect students that never give us any trouble? No, not, Of course not.
Hmm.
But William, I think it was you mentioned this earlier. It's a matter of seeing the potential in these students and nurturing that and watching them grow. And that comes with the ups and downs. That comes with the times when you want to pull your hair out. But you see that potential, so you stick with it and you work with them. And I don't know what to say. Our mentors, we just and it sounds perhaps kind of oh, how can that possibly be true? But I guarantee you talk to any of the mentors on our teams and you're going to get the same story. They love working with these kids, love it. Love seeing how they mature over the years, and being a part of helping them achieve that and seeing where they go in their life. I don't know how much help that is to you.
I think that's really great. I've always found it fascinating because Radar Robotics was just down the road from us, and they supported us so heavily in all of our competitions, especially when I was just starting out. I had no idea what FRC was about. And it's the same story. A grade 9 kid came in and said, oh, here's what we could do. And suddenly the robots, how did you get it flying? Oh, just do this. Okay, wow. Actually, our robot did take air, and that's another story. It kind of landed pieces on the floor. But that was with support of the grade 9 kids. Wow. And so that got me really going in first. Like, wow, look at these kids. Look at the capabilities they've developed over a short amount of time. And I really liked Gianna's comments as well, because it points to several sources of mentors. The teacher mentors, like one magical thing. Well, how did you get 5 teachers? Well, that's pretty good, because some schools, it's kind of hard to get more than 1 teacher. And as Kristen is speaking as concerned, well, making sure there's a good team. So, but a good thing to say is many hands make light work. And a very bad approach that I found, if I took a teacher to my classroom, they would take one look and just run, because there's so much going on in there. Oh, how did you do? Oh, that's crazy. I'm just getting out of here. But I had to explain to them, no, I didn't do that. I didn't even know anything about robotics till 2015. We learned it together. And that was the work of 25 people, not just one. And that doesn't mean the teacher has to do all of this. We can have the students do it too. And wouldn't it even be greater if we had 5 teachers doing it? Because then each teacher can just be once a week, do about half an hour to an hour and a half, whatever you want. It's not going to be the end of your sort of social life, especially if you have this idea that many hands make light work. Sponsorship is an inherent part of the FRC. There's quite a cost structure, and there's a great business experience in terms of marketing and approaching potential sponsors. And once you know, those sponsors love to be involved. Engineers love to play with stuff like that, get them involved in some engineering with some students. And it's so satisfying to see a student now emerging as an engineer with some guidance and mentorship. So then the sponsor mentors are a great sort of thing. And then we have the example of just community mentors, concerned and well-meaning citizens of the general population who may not necessarily be engineers. They're excellent for supervision. They could have specific skills that help manage the team. They could be into videography or sort of editing or all kinds of tasks that are not necessarily engineering and robotics. And of course, the students returning as the mentors. So to go along with this, we do hear a lot from the teams that mentorship is an ongoing concern. And over the last few years, just before the pandemic, we developed something called the Mobile Alumni Crew, which is comprised of a team distributed throughout the province of alumni of the first program who happen to be mobile enough in that they can drive a car or have otherwise access to transportation and have enough expertise to visit a team in situ and support them with their efforts. And we're in negotiation with our 4 hub teams as well, and reassembling such a mobile alumni crew to help support throughout the province. And as a side note, if anyone does know of an alumnus who it may be at university or recently graduated university, or maybe someone who's now retiring but still interested in these things, you may be able to forward that to us and we can assemble our crew. So we're hoping to make this available to the province so that if you contact us here at first, or you contact one of our hub teams, they will be able to line you up with a mentor. And so we have 4 hub teams. Each one of them has a kind of a niche within the hub system, and we're still negotiating. This is not official yet, but we're in the process of establishing them or reconfirming them. 1114, very well-known team, is doing the remote hub, sort of a help desk. You phone up and they give you help, and they may refer you to another team. 1241 is going to hopefully be helping us with the EveryBot and creating opportunities to manufacture the parts for the EveryBot and supporting that effort. Our team 1305 out of North Bay is a rather remote relative to the rest of the province, and so is the rest of Northern Ontario. It is providing a lot of remote support. And then, of course, 772 in Windsor has access to a lot of expertise in various areas and will provide general help in that area of the province, Southwestern Ontario. So we are through a combination of mobile alumni crew, which may be recent graduates of high school, university, or a career, helping us out, and a set of hub teams. And with all of that, we hope to consider Ontario as one big team, supporting each other from the beginning to the end of the season. Ontario and Canada, for that matter, have been quite good at the World Finals of spontaneously swarming around whichever teams go to Einstein Field, or so I've heard. I've never been to the World Finals, but the thinking of that from the very first day, rather than just spontaneously at the World Championships, we might be able to consider our whole jurisdiction as a one big team with a whole network of mentors to support that. Our first inspires.org website also has a mentor support function. We're hoping to work with everyone in that way. So the short of it is, we would ideally like to see every team knowing where to turn to get enough mentors, to have strategies to cultivate additional mentors through teachers, sponsors, community members, and former students, and then our other mentor systems to make sure that the right knowledge and the right support goes everywhere that is needed. So that's, and then of course, these mentor sessions are a part of all of that. So that's just a little bit about assembling a team of mentors. And we've already talked a little bit about structuring an FRC team with the pyramid versus the network kind of approach. It might be sort of nice to hear from everyone about their season timeline. And the season timeline may be different for each team. September 1st, how does that begin? All the way to June 30th. I'm speaking of schools. And for community teams, it could be September 1st all the way to August 31st. Who knows? Every team is different. But there are maybe certain elements of your season timeline and how you organize your mentorship around those different parts of the team to bring out the best in your team, to make sure you meet the deadlines, and to get everything done as it needs to be done. So this is a great place to share about that.
$13.25 definitely does the September when schools are recruiting, and some schools don't have robotic teams, so that's where we try to get our message out. And then we go till August 31st based on, you know, what summer programs we can do for outreach to prepare for the upcoming year. And yeah, the September, October, November part of December is all about giving hands-on experience. Typically we do things like, in some years we've torn down old robots, we've moved locations several times, but we think we have a more stable home for the first time in the last 5 years. And then we're teaching them how to use some of the tools so that when we do kickoff that first weekend in January, they're ready to start prototyping. That's the rapid iteration part of it, of course, where we're saying, okay, throw all these ideas on the table, let's see, and then build a few and see what works and what doesn't. And yes, we may still iterate beyond that. Once we had our practice field built, we got experience on the field and started to iterate again for some additional improvements. But our timeline is recruit August, September, even earlier, because we now have a demo bot we've put together that we can take out to malls and other places, and hopefully, get kids who might be in the mall interested enough to give them the information and get them, visiting us down the road. All right, enough for me.
Thank you. That was really great, just to hear how that all goes with your team. A few little things come to mind in response to that. The demo bot is really helpful to let people know what it is, let them feel it, let them drive it. The demo bot also is a good thing to have during a build season. The first 2 seasons, we didn't have such a demo bot, and it was really difficult because we take last year's robot perfectly working, tear it down to get the existing Roborio and all the electronics, and suddenly now we don't have a working robot all the way up until, oh, guess what? February 21st is bag and tag day. So now we haven't even tested the robot all the way along, and we haven't had them practicing and all of that. So bag and tag was a particular problem for that, but even without the bag and tag, with having 2 or more robots, we usually have 2 robots. We tear down a robot from 3 years ago and have 1 robot always there to be able to test things. And then another one is building. So then you can be doing things in parallel, and that made it much more manageable. So that's one element for a new team, getting access to someone else's bot to just do some practice, some coding. Cat photobombing is always good. Maybe that can be the mascot of the robotics team. That's good. So finding ways to get access to additional robots is really helpful. And if you do have teams down the road, that's often the case. And this year, several teams lent out robots to other teams just to get that experience. Even for rookies, it's even better. If you're in November, don't even know what a robot is, why not get a hold of one and let it work? Because the first time I ever operated a FRC robot was on bag and tag night. And that was a little too late because I didn't know what the FRC was about. And wow, it would have been great to have access to that a little earlier.
Let me add one thing about the demo bot. In this case, we built it a little smaller than the typical competition bot. And the reason is now we can get it in somebody's car without having to take the trailer to move things around to different venues.
Very nice that way. And my student actually ended up making such a demo bot, which just had the electronics, no wheels, but some of the interactive sensors and a motor. And we used it to climb. We had designed a modular sort of approach to adding gearboxes on to have it climb different sort of obstacles at a certain, and see what time it would take with different gear ratios. So that was really helpful as well. So our timeline in the season, also Tom had sort of alluded to, well, the recruiting season, and that can be basically all year, but you said it expanded, it was focused in sort of August, September. And there's a great strategy if you're a community team. It's very common for schools to have students who are interested and they don't have a team. So what a great time for a community team to offer a service in that way. And tearing down old robots, I think that was a useful sort of point there, as I worked that into my September to December classes. And we just make that part of, say, a computer programming or computer engineering class to work with the old robots and tear them down, or just in club time. And that's a great way to train up new teams. Other teams are using the FTC season to do this. And I'm not sure if there are people out there who have both FTC and FRC. I have a feeling even in this call, there are a few people. So you use your FTC team, especially for new grade 9 and 10 students, to build up their skills so they hit the ground at least jogging when September or January rolls around and we have our kickoff. And then, of course, the intensity of the build season. There's always the best of intentions. Oh, yeah, by January 15th, we're going to have it all catted, and January 21st, we're going to have it all built. And projects always take longer than we might think. And so maybe there's a few comments available about how do we deal with those inevitable delays. Oh, everything's great except we're missing that one little bearing and it's on back order from Vex Robotics. Oh, oops. So the
That's a good point, William, because
Yeah.
last year and I think this year, it looks like there's going to be some difficulties getting parts. So, I mean, that has to be factored into when kids want to build a complete new robot with none of the parts that they have, and they've got to order these things. And thank God it's not a 6.5 week build, because it would be almost impossible. We would have not gotten many robots on the field in Ontario had that been the case this year. There were just too many delays. And I think we're going to be emphasizing that to teams, that they have to figure out a way to do it without trying to order so many parts, because they may not be able to get them. It's just going to be a situation that we all have to deal with. But knowing that going in the fall could make that a little bit easier for teams.
And I think we can also take advantage of the accumulated experience and even inventory of the various teams in this regard and network around. I see Tom has a comment about this.
Yeah, in terms of past sponsors who you depend on, that was tricky the last 3 years, right? Where suddenly they had to shut down, they had no personnel. And meanwhile, you're going, well, we sent you our CAD files, when are they going to be ready? Well, luckily we got enough in time, but having those sponsors already prepped ahead of time is really critical. That's one of the other things you need to do in the fall, is get people who are going to make certain metal parts that you just don't have the tooling for. How do you get them to deliver on time once you say, hey, we're going to be firing on all cylinders in January, we're going to send you files. Can you please put something in your schedule now, even though it's 4 months out, to help us out with that?
Well, that's a really great point. I can say from the other side of the coin, manufacturing all the parts in-house takes a long time. So having some of them done with, say, CNC and outsourced sort of arrangement is a really great approach. Makes for a better looking robot as well, because as much as your grade 9 students may have helped you with the bandsaw, cutting something by hand, unless you're like just a super precise person, it's going to look like it was hand cut. That was a signature of our robots, clearly handmade, but kind of worked. So yes, John.
Just regards to having a demo bot, we always try to make it a point not to disable the robot until after parents' night. So we'd always set up a display in the foyer, run the robot around, have kids of school drive the robot, shoot the robot. Made a big sign, mentors wanted. We got 2 that way who stuck around for a few weeks, and then they didn't show up after that. But anyway, it was worth a try. So that gave us a few mentors. One of the things with regard, and as far as teams, our timeline, we all start in September, get the kids, try to teach them as much as we can, keep the robot around. Once parents' night ends up, then dismantle it to pieces. We're a low resource team. We can't go out. We wanted to buy a Limelight for years. We can't afford a Limelight. We don't have $600 lying around to buy a Limelight. So we, have to go the other route, Arduino or Raspberry Pi and, Chameleon software to try to do targeting, as the case may be. One thing with regards to the kids, and this is just, again, the philosophy. I mean, the kids always go to competition and they see the robots that are powder coated, CNC machine. And we've got a hacksaw and some power tools. Our machine shop became a dance studio, so we don't have a machine shop anymore because we became a arts focused school. So we're working out of a wood shop room in a little corner of the wood shop room to do our robotics. So we're basically hand tools. And without a shop teacher, we can't turn the power on. So we have an extension cord that goes out the hall, plugs in, so we can charge our drills and so on. So as a lower resource team, we had to look other ways. So we tried to, tell the kids, anybody got a 3D printer at home? So we started printing shaft collars, spacers, we did macadam wheels, we did as much 3D printing as we could to try to save down costs as best we can. And when the kids, as I said earlier, if the kids looked at designs that are powder coated and CNC and so on, one robot we sent out to be CNC, we made a part, and it cost us $500 to do the CNC. That blew the budget. Nice looking part, but the robot was okay. Our philosophy was every year, make it look a little nicer and work a little better. When we put our first robot on the floor at 2004, it had hockey sticks and duct tape on the field. So, it didn't work out too well, but it was on the field. The kids were really excited. But, they always come back and say, well, yeah, but did you see so-and-so and so-and-so, right? Yeah. They really look really well, but we don't have those machining capabilities. So we just said, make it look a little nicer and work a little better. It's a cumulative thing. You're not going to come out of the gate and build the greatest robot in 1 year from nothing. It's acquired skills, so skill set that you're trying to pass on, knowledge that you're trying to pass on, hopefully continuing mentors that can keep that going. My little statement here about mentors is more political, and that is I'm in a school board, or we're in a school board that did the dual teaching, online and in person, and all of my mentors said goodbye to FRC. If they're going to ask me to do online teaching and in-person teaching, I don't have time for this. So I lost all the mentors in 2021, and I just did this. I did the team remotely using Discord. We'll talk about it later. Using Discord, I ran the team through 2021, and for even the start of 2022. So we didn't compete, but we still did. We did the online team, non-registered. So I think looking at 3D printing. I mean, it's if a lot of kids have them. We only have one at the school, so it's got a lot of use. But the kids at home are doing a lot of it, and we tried to reimburse them for their filament as best we could, but that worked for us.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for those comments. I think we're now coming up for our scheduled 15-minute break because since we're working with robots, we are not robots, and we may need to just be human beings for 15 minutes and come back at 2:45, at which time we may address some of the comments in the chat that I missed. At around 1:41, there was a question about Scrum techniques. And I missed that because it's over there on my monitor and it's just outside of my field of view. And I had planned for us to discuss a few of these project management techniques after the break. But also, I think it may be wise for us to try to look at the fourth section this afternoon. I was going to have us do a little practical exercise. And just because of the time, it may be better for us to discuss a little bit more about this Slack and Discord kind of issue, because that seemed to be figuring on everyone's minds a lot. So we'll see what everyone's thinking after the break. Really great getting to know everyone this afternoon, and thank you so much for all your contributions. It's really appreciated. It creates kind of a rounded out kind of feel about all of our collective efforts in highly varied situations to manage our teams. So we'll see you in about 15 minutes and continue with some project management technique discussion.